Thank you. Before we move to the next item of business, may I inform members that a motion to revise business tomorrow has been lodged and will be taken just before decision time today. The motion proposes that the business tomorrow begins at 1:30 and that decision time will be 8 p.m. to allow more time for the Stage 3 proceedings on the Children and Young People Scotland Bill. A revised Section A has been issued and copies will be available at the back of the Chamber. We now move to topical questions. Question number 1, Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the comments of the President of the European Commission that it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for an independent Scotland to join the European Union.
Cabinet Secretary Nicholas Sturgeon.
The decision on Scottish independence is for the Scottish people, and the decision about continuing membership of the European Union will be for the Member States. These are not decisions for the European Commission. And of course, no Member State has said that it would seek to veto Scotland's continuing membership. It would be against the interests not just of Scotland but of the entire European Union for Scotland to be outside of that union. It would also be contrary to the founding principles of the European Union for Scotland to be excluded just because Scots had exercised their democratic right to self-determination.
Drew Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to the Deputy First Minister for that answer. Of course, the problems that the Nationalist campaign have faced this week seem to be because of their failure to understand that it is not for them simply to assert the national interests of others. Now, I listened carefully to Mr Swinney calling Mr Barroso preposterous at the weekend. Listened carefully to what the Deputy First Minister says, just as we listened when she said Scotland would be automatically admitted into the EU, and Alex Salmond said they had legal advice to back that up. But what is now clear to everyone is that Scotland can only join the EU as an independent member state by negotiation and by agreement of the other member states. So we know that the process of negotiation may be difficult and that even the Scottish Government does not always get its own way when it negotiates. So up for negotiation will be the British rebate, border arrangements, including tuition fees and, crucially, Euro membership. So can I ask the Deputy First Minister one very direct and simple question, Presiding Officer? What will be Alex Salmond's red line? Because on the issue of the euro, I listened carefully to John Swinney at the weekend. Is the Scottish Government ruling out signing any accession treaty which contains any clause committing Scotland to euro membership at any time in the future?
Deputy First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I think the big problem for the No campaign is that, having failed abysmally to inspire anyone to vote no, they have to resort to scaring, bullying and intimidating people into voting no. Now, the process of negotiation and agreement that Drew Smith refers to is, of course, laid out very clearly in the White Paper, as is our intention to argue for the transition of European membership with continuity of effect. In other words, no detriment to the interests of any other member state. But I would say this to Drew Smith. He and I disagree on the issue of independence, but I've always, perhaps until today, thought of him as someone who reaches his positions from the point of principle. And I would ask him to take a step back and consider what is being suggested here. Scotland has been in the European Union for 40 years. We've complied with EU law for 40 years. We've contributed to the EU for 40 years. But the suggestion is that simply as a result of exercising our democratic right to self-determination, we would find ourselves outside. Now, not only is there no basis for that in the European treaties, or in common sense, or in the interests of the wider EU, or indeed in anything any member state has actually said, it would in fact be an absolute affront to democracy and against the founding principles of the European Union. And I would have thought that any Democrat, yes or no, would have found that to be completely and utterly unacceptable.
Christina McKelvey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Given that the European Commission spokesperson is now backtracking on Mr Barroso's comments, does the Deputy First Minister agree with Professor Michael Keating, who has said that the comparison drawn by President Barroso between an independent Scotland and Kosovo is utterly misplaced and is dangerous and does a disservice to democracy itself?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the comparison between Scotland and Kosovo is completely and utterly ridiculous, and I noted that yesterday President Barroso's spokesperson said that it was, and I quote, not a perfect analogy, which I think probably qualifies as the understatement of the century. An independent Scotland is a model European state. We already meet all of the membership criteria of the European Union, and to quote Graham Avery, Honorary DG of the European Commission, it's obvious that the common sense solution would be for Scotland's membership of the EU to be effective on the same day as its independence, and it is obvious that 5 million Scottish citizens who have been European citizens for 40 years should be treated in the same way as people of not be treated the same way as people of non-member countries, or third countries as they're called in the Euro jargon. This is an argument that cries out for common sense. This side of the chamber applies that common sense, and the sooner those on the no side ditch the scaremongering and apply some basic common sense, the better.
Annabel Goldie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I don't know what polls the Deputy First Minister reads, but I read different ones, and the account is not as she describes it. Now, she clearly accepts that other member states in the EU have to agree the admission of an independent Scotland to be a member. And common sense, to which she is clearly attached, says that member states can say yes, but they can also say no. Also, will she further confirm that these other member states, as they will also decide the conditions attaching to membership for an independent Scotland, what are the red line issues for Alex Salmond? And her silence in this aspect will be taken as a no.
Deputy First Minister.
Can I say to Annabel Goldie, I didn't in any of my previous answers, although I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong about in my memory of this, I didn't mention polls. But I'm now very happy to mention the opinion polls, because of course it is the narrowing of the polls and the swing towards yes that has occasioned the intensifying of the scaremongering we've had from the No campaign in recent days. Now, Annabel Goldie says that all member states would require to agree. That is a statement of fact that is set out in the White Paper, and I would challenge her to name me one single member state, including Spain, which is often cited as the one that would want to give us trouble, that has said that it would veto or try to block Scotland's continuing membership. And until she can do so, she is indulging in nothing more than empty and baseless scaremongering. And in terms of her so-called red lines, and the irony of a Tory standing up and talking about red lines in a discussion about the European Union is absolutely breathtaking. We argue for transition of membership from being members as part of the UK to being independent members on the basis of continuity of effect. Now, if she wants to know the detail of that, we would not be in the euro. No country can be forced into the euro against its will, as Sweden ably demonstrates. In terms of Schengen, the European Union exists to take down borders between countries, not to do things that would erect borders between countries. And thirdly, on the rebate, we have made it absolutely clear that the rebate would be a matter for negotiation between the Scottish and the UK governments until the next budget period of the European Union. These are the facts. And the fact that the other parties in the Better Together Tory-Labour alliance are so determined to try and scare the people of Scotland is proof positive that things are not going their way. The polls are moving in the direction of yes.
Will there any?
The idea that the First Minister is pulling the strings in 28 capital cities around Europe is Napoleonic in its bravado. But the truth, is it not, closer to what the Croatian ambassador told this Parliament? With the EU, you pretty well have to take what you are offered. So, for the third time, what is she prepared to give up to get in?
Deputy First Minister.
Sorry, my apologies to Willie Rennie. I forgot to mention the Liberal Democrats and the Labour-Tory Liberal Democrat Better Together alliance. I've made it quite clear, as the White Paper makes it quite clear, we're not arguing for any change in the terms of the relationship between Scotland and the European Union than the ones that pertain to our relationship as a member of the UK on the euro on Schengen, on the rebate. We are arguing for continuity of effect. That is a reasonable position, and while the no parties in this chamber don't exercise much reasonableness in this debate, I think the position of other member states would be entirely different. Because let's not forget that we are talking here about Scotland, Europe's largest oil producer, the country with the biggest share of EU waters, the country whose renewable energy potential is key to the EU meeting its own renewable energy targets, a major exporter of premium products like whisky, and home to thousands upon thousands of European nationals. It is not only in the interest of Scotland to remain a constructive, productive member of the European Union, it is in the interest of the entire European Union to keep Scotland as a member.
Thank you very much. The Deputy First Minister fails to notice any parallel between Scotland's position and Kosovo's. She is perhaps aware that Kosovo is one of those countries that uses someone else's currency without being a member of a currency union. I wonder if the Deputy First Minister can try again to answer the question. Will signing a treaty that commits Scotland to being a member of the European Currency Union be a red line that the SNP would not cross in the event of an independent Scotland? If even one of the 28 member states of the European Union suggested that that was a requirement for admission, would she simply say we're not going in?
I think people in Scotland will find the attempt of Lewis MacDonald to draw a comparison between Scotland and Kosovo, a comparison that even President Barroso is moving away from, to be quite offensive. But on the issue of Euro membership, can I suggest to Lewis MacDonald that before he comes and asks these questions, he does some basic research? Yes. Sweden is a perfect example of a country that has made it quite clear that it's not going to enter the Euro and cannot be forced to enter the Euro against its will, because some of the criteria for Euro membership are, of course, entirely voluntary, such as membership for 2 years of the European exchange rate mechanism. So there is no question whatsoever of an independent Scotland being forced to use the euro against its will. And it's about time Lewis MacDonald and his colleagues in the Tory Labour Better Together alliance stop spreading baseless scare stories.
Rod Campbell.
So does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that whether Article 48 or 49 is pursued, the Commission's role is one of consultation? And given that Mr Barroso's role is President of that Commission, does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that it's imprudent of Mr Barroso to be seemingly speaking on behalf of Member States?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we have set down in the White Paper, as Rod Campbell is well aware, a process by which Scotland can make the transition from membership of the EU as part of the UK to independent membership. We suggest Article 48 of the European Treaties is a reasonable process by which to do that. But of course, the precise process that is used will be one for agreement between the member states, and we've always been quite clear on that point. But Rod Campbell is absolutely right. The decision about independence, as I said in my original answer, is for the Scottish people. The decision about our continuing membership is for the Member States. It is not a decision for the European Commission. It's not a decision for a President of the European Commission who won't even be in office when these matters are being discussed.
Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think what's scaring the Scottish people is the lack of real clarity from the Yes campaign about a number of issues, not least being that of entry to the EU. I'm sure the Deputy First Minister is very well aware, Presiding Officer, that in order to be a member of the EU, you have to sign up to a number of treaties. Those treaty provisions will apply whether or not the Deputy First Minister likes it. So for the avoidance of doubt, for I think the fourth time this afternoon, what issues would be a red line for this government? Would it be the currency? Would it be the euro? Or would you be prepared to do a deal on the rate of VAT that might apply in an independent Scotland?
Deputy First Minister.
I'm not quite sure whether members, particularly on the Labour benches, are hard of hearing or hard of understanding. I've made the position absolutely clear in terms of the currency position. An independent Scotland, led by the Scottish Government, would not be in the euro. And for those who say not being in the euro absolutely is a red line, because we would not join the euro. And I've already cited the example of Sweden, which makes it absolutely clear that no country can be forced to join the euro against its will. A real, live, living example of the fact that Labour is downright wrong.
Question number 2, Bruce Crawford.
To ask the Scottish Government what contact it has had with the UK Government regarding the Edinburgh Agreement in light of recent comments by the UK Government regarding currency and the senior coalition source regarding respect for the outcome of the referendum.
Deputy First Minister.
Well, on Saturday, the First Minister wrote to the Prime Minister reminding him of the Edinburgh Agreement and the commitment given in it by both of them to respect the outcome of the referendum. The First Minister also urged the Prime Minister to distance himself personally from reports that a coalition source has said that a yes vote would not guarantee independence. As of this morning, there has been no response from the Westminster Government. The Edinburgh Agreement also committed both governments to work together constructively in the interests of the people of Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom after the referendum, whatever the result.
Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister, for our answer. Will the Deputy First Minister confirm that Section 30 of the Edinburgh Agreement commits the Scottish and UK governments to good communication and mutual respect? Does the Deputy First Minister agree with me that it is sad that the UK Government are only prepared to stand by agreements when it suits them? Would she also agree with me that the Chancellor's repeated references to people in Scotland as foreigners in his speech last week is clear evidence of lack of respect? And like me, does she consider that the people of Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland will never think of each other as foreigners, regardless of September's outcome?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I think Bruce Crawford is absolutely right to say that the UK Government seems only to want to abide by the terms of the Edinburgh Agreement when it suits them. But I think, as I've said, and I think I said in response to Drew Smith, the big problem for the No campaign is that they have failed completely to find any positive reasons for people to vote no in the referendum. So the only recourse they have is to try to scare, to bully and to intimidate the people of Scotland into voting no. But I confidently predict, Presiding Officer, that tactic will not work, as I think we can already see in the growing backlash against George Osborne's sermon on the pound that took place on Thursday last week. And it kind of begs the question, I think, Presiding Officer, if the picture of the Union that the No campaign is trying to paint is one where Scotland really has no stake whatsoever in the assets of the UK, assets that we have contributed to building up, but only, according to No, a share of the debt, then why on earth would anybody want to vote to stay in a union like that? That is the question. And as for the issue of foreigners, I think any suggestion that we would be foreigners to our friends and family in the rest of the UK says more about the No campaign than it does about reality, as the perfect example of Ireland cited by Bruce Crawford so ably demonstrates.
Bruce Crawford.
I wonder if the Deputy First Minister would also agree with me on the point of democracy, that for UK government sources, and followed up by people like Baroness J, it is an affront to the people of Scotland to suggest in any way that the outcome of the referendum next September will be pushed aside by the UK Government if that was to be the case. Is that not a travesty of the Scottish people's opportunity for democracy?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do think it is a travesty of democracy. I think it is an affront to democracy, but I also think it is a sign of the growing panic at the heart of the No campaign. They see the polls narrowing, they see the swing towards yes, so we get treated to the kind of scaremongering that we've seen over the past few days. And just in case that doesn't work, as I confidently predict it won't work, we have to have people like Baroness J saying, don't worry, yes won't mean yes after all. Well, let me be quite clear to the people of Scotland, in the interests of democracy, yes will mean yes, and I'm confident people in Scotland will vote yes.
Malcolm Chisholm.
Everyone of any significance respects the Edinburgh Agreement and will accept the results of the referendum. But why does the Cabinet Secretary refuse to believe what UK politicians are saying about the currency, given that the rest of the United Kingdom trades 4 times as much with the Eurozone as with Scotland, but has no interest in joining the Euro. Why does she think transaction costs will override every other issue for the UK Government? Is her refusal to face reality and come up with a Plan B, based on the knowledge that a Plan B will be even more resoundingly rejected by the Scottish people than what she is proposing, which is a currency union with no fiscal independence?
Deputy First Minister.
Malcolm Chisholm, as we all know, is one of the more reasonable politicians in the opposition benches in this Parliament, but I can't be the only one, when I listen to him on the subject of the referendum, gets the feeling that he's trying more to convince himself than he is to convince anybody else. The reasons why I believe George Osborne is bluffing and engaging in bluff and bluster is that it would be in the interests of the rest of the UK, as much as in the interests of Scotland, for us to continue to use the pound within a sterling zone. We do know that England exports £60 billion into Scotland every year. Scotland is the second biggest export market. England exports more into Scotland than China, India, Brazil, South Africa put together. I don't think there will be any English businesses who relish the prospect of paying an additional tax in the form of transaction costs. And that's before we get to the impact on the balance of payments. Removal of oil and gas exports alone from the sterling zone's balance of payments would blow a hole in it, would put the trade deficit through the roof, would impact on the value of sterling. So I think we all know that George Osborne, backed by his newfound allies in the Labour Party and his existing allies in the Liberal Democrats, is engaging in campaign rhetoric. But when the campaign is over and when Scotland has voted yes, common sense will prevail.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wonder if the Deputy First Minister would agree with me that whilst unelected peers like Baroness Jay and Tories like George Osborne seem to have trouble understanding basic democracy, the days of such people dictating us should well be over. Scotland understands democracy and Scotland wishes to build a fairer and more prosperous country.
Cabinet Secretary.
Linda Fabiani is absolutely right, and on top of all the other benefits of independence, can I offer 2 more? We won't have an unelected House of Lords in an independent Scotland. And secondly, if Scotland votes for independence, we need never again have a Tory government that we don't vote for.
Annabel Goldie. Order.
In any other context, I might feel I've had a threat of getting my jotters, but on this occasion it doesn't worry me any more than it has worried me in the past. Presiding Officer, the Finance Secretary, when confronted with the reality of a separate currency in an independent Scotland, claimed this would cost English businesses £500 million a year in transaction costs. Yet, despite being asked 5 times on television last night, he was unable to furnish us with the transaction costs for an independent Scotland of a separate currency. Will the Deputy First Minister now confirm from her basic research what the cost of a salmon tax would be for an independent Scotland using a separate currency?
Deputy First Minister.
The problem Annabel Goldie has got here is that that's not our proposal. One of the reasons we propose a sterling zone is so that English businesses nor Scottish businesses would have to incur the additional transaction costs. The transaction costs are entirely a George Osborne tax, and that's something the Tories are going to have to face up to.
The Deputy First Minister talks about the positive case for the United Kingdom. She is increasingly becoming the strongest advocate for the United Kingdom. She argues for the currency union, the Bank of England as a lender of last resort, and against transaction costs. I'm now pleased that she now realises what we've been arguing for a very long time. A nationalist banging the drum for keeping the UK as part of her argument for leaving the UK. Hasn't nationalist politics now become a snake eating its own tail?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the problem for Willie Rennie is that since he went into coalition with the Tories, nobody actually knows what the Liberal Democrats stand for or believe in, or indeed if they stand for or believe in anything. But let me help Willie Rennie by giving him a display of something that he won't see often in his own party, and that is a conviction politician that actually believes in something. I believe in Scotland being an independent and equal country, pooling sovereignty with our neighbours and partners across the UK and the European Union where that suits our interests, but a country that has the ability to take decisions here in Scotland, here in our own interests, decisions that will make our country more prosperous, fairer, better for everybody and for future generations to live in. That's what independence is all about.
Jenny Mara.
So, if Scotland votes yes, we won't have the pound. We've learned today from Deputy First Minister that we won't join the euro. So this new currency, John Swinney has told us that the new currency, whatever it will be called, will cost English businesses £500 million in transaction costs. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister to answer the question that John Swinney has refused to answer? How much will it cost Scottish businesses, this new currency, in transaction costs?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I'll be charitable to Jenny Mara. Firstly, can I welcome the fact that she accepted Scotland was going to vote yes? I think that is great progress in this debate. Secondly, can I reiterate the point that I have made repeatedly, just in case you didn't quite catch it in previous answers? Scotland, as an independent country, will use the pound, so we're making progress on 2 points. And if Jenny Mara, somebody who like Drew Smith, I'm sure came into politics for the right reasons, ever again manages to reassert her separate identity from her friends in the Tory party, she would be quick to realise what we argue is in the best interests of Scotland and the rest of the UK.
Gil Patterson.
Cabinet Secretary, George Osborne has said if Scotland walks away from the Union, it walks away from the pound. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what would she think, or what would women think, if George Osborne said to his wife, if you walk away from the marriage, you walk away from our assets?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I think the Tories have got to realise, as do Labour and the Liberal Democrats, that Scotland would be entitled to not just a share of liabilities, but a share of assets as well. I don't agree with George Osborne when he says if we walk away from the Union, we walk away from the pound. What I do agree with is if we decide to vote for independence, then we walk away from Tory governments that we don't vote for.
Neil Findlay.
Did the Deputy First Minister, and apparently now the Finance Secretary also, spend her entire political life as a Braveheart nationalist, only to hand over power over financial regulation, the budget and the currency to the Bank of England, which would then be a foreign country, should Scotland be unwise enough to become independent?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I've spent my entire political life believing in and arguing for independence for Scotland, and that's what I'll continue to do for the next 7 months until we achieve it in the referendum. I think the real tragedy is for somebody like Neil Findlay, who I think spent his entire political life as a deep red socialist, who now finds himself in a coalition with the Conservative Party.
That ends topical questions. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 8.